Hey, welcome to another edition of the Chiefs Outsiders podcast. Kansas City's coming off a big win against the San Francisco 49ers and coasting into the bye with a 5-2 record against a really tough schedule. And I think you've got to be happy overall, standing alone in first place in your division with a good opportunity to march and still compete with Buffalo for that first round bye, and anything can happen. But if we want to talk specifically about the game against San Francisco, what is your biggest takeaway from that game?
Yeah, first, I think, like you said, being 5-2 through this first 7, this gauntlet, I think if you asked any Chiefs fan about that before the season, we all would have been happy with that, and that's about as realistic, like as good as it could have been realistically. And I think when you start talking about this game and what really happened, you've got to, for the second time in a 4-week period, the Chiefs have faced a just ridiculous defense that has been ranked at near the top in almost every statistic, and just lit them up all day long. Did whatever they wanted. They buried a great defense.
So, at the time that the game was played, Kansas City has played 3 defenses in 7 games that were either ranked first in points allowed or yards allowed. And San Francisco was first in yards allowed and several other metrics, and only allowing 14 points a game. And then...
Yeah, and they had only been allowing 250 yards a game of total offense. And there is an argument there that they hadn't played a ton of great quarterbacks, but this is a defense full of talented star players, and with an up-and-coming defensive coordinator that's getting talk for head coaching jobs, and we've seen firsthand what this defense can do, and just a few years ago, and how good they can be, and it just didn't matter. The Chiefs did almost anything they wanted.
Yep, and I felt a little bit reminiscent of the Super Bowl watching that, where there were moments where you said, man, how are we going to stop this team? Because the 49ers are fast and aggressive. Offensively, they come at you and they try to just run over you. I mean, at the beginning of that game, I felt like they were more like they wanted it more.
Mm-hmm.
They're fighting for extra yards, and we're like throwing their guys forward for more yards. You got the first offensive play when, Andy kind of said Sky Moore didn't run his route quite right and needed to come back and give Patrick a better target on that. But it starts off with the interception. You go, man, this is going to be a rough day. And then what happened next is it almost didn't matter what San Francisco did. They do whatever. They continued to play well offensively. San Francisco still had a pretty decent offensive game. But it just doesn't matter if you're going to score 7 consecutive touchdowns like they did against the Houston Texans in a playoff game. Or I think they've done that like 3 times.
They've done it against Buffalo last year, yeah.
Yeah, of 7 consecutive touchdowns. That seems like the starting point for a great offensive game for Kansas City. Is something that probably no Kansas City team had done in 58 years of franchise history, or however many years there's been. Now we just do it all the time. And it pretty much happened in this game because you had 6 consecutive touchdown drives. In the middle of those, you had the missed field goal when there wasn't really time for a drive to begin with. Mm-hmm. And just a remarkable display of offense. And it wasn't one thing. It was everything. It turns into an avalanche of how they did it.
Yeah, and what it really was the pass catchers, almost all of them not named Sky Moore, having a day. And I want to touch on that Sky Moore thing that, if you listen to very many Andy Reid press conferences at all, you know that he will never deliberately throw one of his guys under the bus. He is not a guy to point fingers. But as far as Andy Reid goes, whenever they asked about the interception, the first words out of his mouth were, "That's a good learning experience for Sky." That's about as deliberate of a finger pointing as you'll get out of Coach Reed.
Yeah. And so, you put one emphasis on it, is that we had the two big name receivers, the veteran receivers we brought in to not individually replace Tyreek Hill, but to rebuild a receiving core. Both had their best days as a Chief. Great games. You're thrilled with it, but that's one of like 6 stories the offensive had. You had the story of how they handled Bosa. You had the story of the fact that everybody who ran the ball really well. You had a hat trick from McCole Hardman that's almost forgotten. How often does a receiver have 3 receiving touchdowns and he isn't the first story of the game?
Yeah. And
so what you saw was offensive excellence on display. And I think we saw some really cool stats about that. That he sends me all these. I'm not a big Twitter guy. He sends me all the cool Twitter stats.
Yeah. So the biggest one that is really, it's impossible if you follow the EPA per play, and how that's a really good quality of not only how your individual game is going, but how your season is going. And Patrick Mahomes having an EPA per play in that game of 0.72, that he's adding 0.7 of a point on every attempt that he has. Overall for the game, that an expected points added of 28. They said that just because he played, he added 28 points to the game. And then the offensive series conversion rate is, again, it's a pretty good metric for just analyzing how good an offense really is over the course of a season, because it's what percentage of your series do you convert into new series and a new set of downs. And this year the Chiefs, I believe, are at like the 4th greatest season of all time in that metric. And the craziest part about that is that in the Mahomes era, they have 4 of the top 8 in that metric.
Yeah, you see that all the time. Recently, with the Mahomes seasons, you say there was one where it said like Mahomes was having his worst season of his career in this one advanced metric, and he still led the entire league by a lot in that metric. I don't know if that was the DVOA. I don't get into all those nerdy stats until I see them, and then I try to gain perspective on them. The one you started off talking about, the expected points added of 0.7, adding 0.7 per play. Well, Garoppolo added 0.2 or 0.28 per play, and the commentary was that Garoppolo adding 0.2 points per play means they should have won.
Normally, that's pretty good. Like, for 30 NFL teams, you see that, and that alone, you're like, oh, the offense had a pretty good day.
And Mahomes was 3 times that. And you see these things, and you're also talking about conversion, the conversion percentage. And I first saw that, and I thought, how do you convert 80%? Well, nobody does. That means, so if you had 4 first downs in a drive, and then end up kicking a field goal, you were 80% on that drive because you converted 4 of your 5 series into first downs or touchdowns.
Right.
And so that's a very impressive number. And to have 4 of the 8 greatest seasons offensively in that category ever played by one team in the last 5 years, I mean, how do you quantify that besides saying we're watching the greatest player to ever play this sport?
Yeah, that's exactly how you quantify it. And I want to circle back to where we were at with the pass catchers having a day in this game. And obviously, like you said, McCole Hardman somehow almost being an afterthought despite a 3-touchdown game, becoming the first player in the Super Bowl era to have 2 rushing touchdowns and a receiving touchdown in the same game. And then he didn't have a ton of yardage besides those plays, but you had Juju, 7 catches, 124 yards, and a touchdown. And then Marquez Valdez-Scantling had 3 catches for 111 yards. Travis Kelce did what he always does, which is about 6 for 100. And it's really, really hard to have that kind of productivity all in one offensive day.
Yeah, and then you've got playmakers who aren't even being involved. 88.
Fortson he had 1 catch.
Jody Fortson was only throwing the ball 1 time because everything is working. If they felt like it, I feel like Jody Fortson could have got him 6 catches for 80 yards if that was what they needed. But they don't need him. He's a luxury player. And they're adding, we just did a show talking about the addition of Kadarius Toney. They don't even need him. It's just another weapon. And they've got so many. They've got 3 competent running backs. It feels like McKinnon's blocking is so good you can't take him off the field. He's great in the pass catching game. He's broken big runs. He's not my favorite running back on the team.
Yeah.
I almost don't want him in there, and then he does something great.
See, and it's exactly what you said. It's not like they can't take him off the field. They literally can't. Like, he's the leading snap getter at the running back position just because he is so dominant as a pass blocker and at chipping. And you can't talk about this game again everyone knows how good the 49ers pass rush is. Specifically, Nick Bosa, how good he all by himself is. One of the very best in all of football. And he had the only 49er sack on the day. I believe it was late third quarter. And even on that one, it was a play where Pacheco was in the game, and it looked to me like Wiley was expecting Pacheco to chip, and he didn't. And that was why the sack happened. But you're talking about the offensive line had a great day. A lot of it, again, you wish you didn't have to give both of your tackles help all the time. But anytime that you play the 49ers and only give up 1 sack, that's pretty good.
And it was almost a cat and mouse game with Bosa. Like they were toying with him a little bit because when he's trying to rush and they're chipping him and getting enough time to make the play. And then when he thinks he avoids the chip, you throw the little pass behind him. Mm-hmm. They ran motions at him. They ran all kinds of action at him and kept changing what they were doing to him. And it didn't matter how good he is. It's not that he played poorly. It just didn't matter how good he is because they're so multiple.
Yeah.
Running 3 tight ends a lot, but still having 3 wide receivers have big days. And Sky Moore is a weapon that we all think is going to materialize. They're not even really using him right now.
Mm-hmm.
So this offense is I think this is the best Chiefs team we've seen. And it's because I think Patrick Mahomes is playing the best football he's ever played.
Yeah. And we're all the way into this, and I haven't even talked about Mahomes yet and how good he was in this game. Not only with the throws he was making, but this is clearly, to me, far and away the best he has played this season, or maybe ever, in terms of, I don't know, maybe you go back to that 2019 season when we had Fisher and Schwartz, but in terms of trusting the O-line and hanging in the pocket and being patient. Specifically, you talk about that Justin Watson touchdown. I think it was from the 4-yard line. That play, he stood like a statue in the pocket, did not move for a full 4 seconds. Nobody around him he could have stood flat-footed the entire play.
So there have been points in Patrick Mahomes' career where I said, who are any of us to judge one of the greatest quarterbacks that's ever played the game? And I don't mind calling him that, but who are we to judge him? But there are things that he needs to improve on because he had a problem sometimes of leaving too soon, backing up when he didn't need to back up, not stepping forward in the pocket, maybe holding the ball too long. and then making his magic plays instead of maybe taking the easy play. And I can't remember at all this year saying, that I felt like he was doing that. I feel like he's making the majority of the plays on time in the offense when they're supposed to happen. And then when it doesn't work, then he brings out the bag of tricks. He's not out there just throwing it underhand just to throw it underhand, or left-handed passes just because he's doing it when he has to do it. And the rest of the time he's playing it. And that's why he doesn't turn the ball over very much. His criticism on Pro Football Focus is that he only throws to open receivers.
Yeah.
Well, if I don't know, if as a non-expert, if I was going to strategize, say my plan is I'm going to stand here with the ball until I see somebody open, and then I'll throw it to him. Not to get too complicated, but if that's your criticism, that he only throws it to people who are open, you need to find a new criticism.
And yeah, like I was saying, not by any means to say that there were not fantastic throws made in this game, because there were. But there was only one play that I can remember off the top of my head that fits into that fantastic Mahomes making a play kind of category. And that was the one where he kind of just backpedaled an extra 5 yards and then threw just a jump ball to the middle of the field to Kelsey. And, that was a great play. But whenever you're talking about the two deep shots to MVS in this game, the first one, the deep post where Mahomes had to throttle him down, a guy the ball was, I believe, 49 yards in the air, and he had to throttle him down and sit him down in between a safety and a corner, and the ball wound up being, a foot off of the ground, 40 yards down the field, for about the only place he could have put it. And then the other deep shot to Marquez, I saw a breakdown of it where, based on the coverage and the pre-snap and what he was seeing, that Mahomes' initial read on that play was looking at Kelsey on a little out to that same side of the field. And then it was in the same motion, because he saw the safety coming down on that Kelsey route, he didn't even look at Marquez before he was throwing the ball 52 yards in the air. And I want to touch on that too, because part of that is nobody in football knows Charvarius Ward as well as the Chiefs do. And just knowing if he's one-on-one deep with a speed threat, and he's flat-footed at any point, he's not going to catch up.
Yeah, and Mahomes had a great game. But there was one thing that I think I've only seen talked about a couple places or a couple times, and I think maybe the biggest thing that happened in this game is that a conscious decision was made in this game. Let's throw some back shoulder balls. When you look at the elite quarterbacks in the league who are older, like an Aaron Rodgers or a Tom Brady, they get their share of yards in a game and completions by hitting that back shoulder throw. And it's, if you and the receiver have it worked out perfectly, doesn't make any difference what the defender does. They don't have to be open like we were just talking about. You just are the only two people who know it's happening on that play, because the last play, he kept going. So you're the only two guys, and Aaron Rodgers has thrown so many of those. And I watched the Packers play, and I say, why don't we do that? Not take away everything else we do, but just every once in a while hit them with the back shoulder. Mm-hmm. And we saw it work well.
Yeah.
And adding that in as an option and having a receiver that you can count on to time it right and to catch it clean is a big deal.
Yeah, and Aaron is absolutely the best I've ever seen at it. And it's once he gets to a level of comfortability with a certain guy, the two that come to mind are Jordy Nelson and Devontae Adams, that anytime you were playing the Packers or watching the Packers, if it's 3rd and 8 and they decide to go to that, you can't do anything about it, because the ball is going to be in a spot where only he can get it, and he's going to know it's coming. And I think Mahomes threw one of those to Juju in the Colts game, and I remember getting all amped up and excited about it, and then it kind of just, we hadn't seen it, and then in this game, they threw one to Juju that was perfectly executed. It was a great catch, and then they threw one to MVS that literally hit him in the face mask and then happened to fall into his lap. So it's catch, but barely.
He tried to drop that one.
Yeah. But
Pat
still,
wouldn't let him. Made it bounce back up.
But still, it is awesome to see that be implemented into the offense, because with a quarterback like Mahomes, there's no reason it shouldn't be.
Yep. So I look at it as, if you take the greatest offenses in NFL history and say, what was the best 5-year stretch for the Peyton Manning Colts? So all of these other examples that come to mind, I started to say, well, I can't use them, and I can't use them, and I can't use them as examples because they only did 3 years and then fell off. You know, like your greatest show on turf Rams and your 49ers in the 80s had a longer run. The Cowboys run, you know, the Patriots when they had Randy Moss. These all-time great offenses. Manning did it with the Broncos also. Mm-hmm. All-time great offenses. I think Kansas City has the most prolific 5-year stretch consecutive of being a top 3 scoring team and all these other statistical accomplishments of the offense. And you think there have still been a couple critical times where they were held to 17 points or whatever the case, or in a Super Bowl they were shut down till half and it was over, and there are teams have found ways in an important game to make it hard on them. Teams like Buffalo last year, that Buffalo didn't really hurt us that bad this year defensively. That was just a slower paced game.
Yeah.
But Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl, and you got to have a way when they do get Mahomes and he's running wild and their pass rush is on him. Man, if you could throw some of these back shoulder balls or a little fade into the end zone, there are certain types of routes that Andy just doesn't use. And then if they started using them to where we say, we're just guaranteed every game we're going to go 3 of 4 for 60 yards to Juju on those back shoulder balls.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to try and make it seem like I think this is all one guy, but it does make me curious, because there is a guy who was added to this coaching staff this season who had a little experience the last 3 or 4 seasons in throwing these back shoulder balls to a big target, and that's Matt Nagy with Allen Robinson in Chicago. And being a former quarterback, being the quarterback coach, and then even on the New Heights podcast with Travis and Jason Kelce, Travis Kelce had a comment that I thought was really interesting, where he gave praise to Matt Nagy specifically for how he coaches the passing game, and then mentioned Bieniemy with Andy Heck as how they coach the running game. And again, I think all of these guys have a process in calling plays and deciding what the team is going to target on an individual week. But I think there's a legitimate chance that Matt Nagy has a hand in that being added to the offense this year.
And I want to say this with complete respect to Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, but I think there are 2 reasons that this Chiefs offense has been this historic. It's Patrick Mahomes as a singular talent, and Andy Reid as an offensive innovator, and the fact that I feel like what Andy does so well is he makes you respect everything, because they do everything. You have to respect everything. And when a team has stifled us, I'm like, I watch some other teams, and I'm like, man, they're taking the easy money that sometimes we're not taking. And that's where I'm saying, like, you're adding in one more way to take some easy money. Say, man, they're blanketing this with this kind of coverage, and, you know, this isn't working. Let's take that. And So anytime you can add something and it's about making the defense think about it. Say, hey, we don't even have to worry about those routes because they don't throw them.
And that was, I think, a large benefit from what we just saw against the 49ers is not only were those back shoulder throws added into that repertoire of what the Chiefs can do to you, but this was the first time this season that we saw the deep ball really get cooking. And that's just teams were not believing that the Chiefs could line up and just run by you. And if you get 2 of those to hit in one game to Marquez, that you have to respect it. And then, that opens up all sorts of other things.
And with all of that, we ran a lot of 3 tight end, 1 receiver sets.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're showing the ability on those formations to run power, or all 3 tight ends are legit receiving weapons. So just so multiple on offense. But we could talk until the bye week ends about how good the Chiefs offense is and why. As long as we don't mention the Colts game.
Right.
Team's best luck that they ever have with us is slowing it down and limiting possessions. And they do that when our defense isn't ending drives. And the defense is being overlooked right now because the offense was so good. It was not a great defensive day.
Not their best.
Yeah, and it was better as it went on. In the beginning, it was pretty rough. It looked like they were just going to run over us all day.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably could have if they had just stuck with it. But one of my favorite defensive players is Willie Gay, and I didn't see what I was hoping for from him. He looked like a guy who'd been off for 4 weeks and coming back, but he looked a step slow. He didn't flash as much as I was hoping.
I think they may have had him on a snap count as well, and my only other concern with that is the timing of the bye going into that may continue, that they don't play him a ton until they can get a couple games in a row under his belt. But you talked earlier about the similarities between this game and the Super Bowl, and I think there is a strong argument there. And the main difference is the Chiefs were down 10 immediately in this game versus being down 10 in the fourth quarter. But as this game went on, as it got deep, we talked about the 49ers scored right at the beginning of the fourth quarter to cut it to a 5-point game. 1 possession game. It had been competitive all the way through to that point. And then from that point on, offense and defense, the Chiefs just ran away with it. And the defense really got cooking there in the fourth quarter. And part of that I would argue is because as soon as Jimmy Garoppolo has to be a quarterback and not just a handoff machine, he starts to struggle. But I mean, Chris Jones and Frank Clark both had 2 massive plays in this game.
Frank Clark played his best game of his time in Kansas City, and he's had a few good ones.
Yeah.
But he was just he had a good first half against the Raiders before he had his illness come up again.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was fantastic in that game. He's had bigger games because they were bigger moments.
Yeah.
But as far as just how he played against regarded as one of the 3 best tackles in the NFL.
Against a Hall of Famer in Trent Williams. And I think definitely that Trent Williams was not 100% in this game. He had a high ankle sprain as a 300-something pound man, just a month ago. But he is out there. He is a future Hall of Famer. A phenomenal player. A player that the Chiefs were willing to pay $23 million a year just last year, had the 49ers not been willing to go just a nickel higher. And, beating him cleanly in the end zone for a safety in a game that at that point was a 12-point game, far from over. And Trent Williams didn't get a hand on Frank Clark on that play.
Yeah, and he looked good the whole game, and then he dominated on back-to-back plays when it mattered the most. which is how I would describe the career of Chris Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Looked good the whole game and then dominated in two big moments when it mattered the most. That's who Chris Jones is as a player, not necessarily who Frank Clark's always been with us. But I want to say that an underrated story for Kansas City is that even though Chris Jones has a 15 sack or 16 sack season on his resume, I think he's having the best season of his career right now as a slightly older player who's not in a contract year and is just playing great football and coming up with the biggest hits at the biggest moments for the defense.
Absolutely. I think he is having a career year, and although he's not in a contract year, this is a big year in terms of his future with the team because he's got a very large cap hit next year. And this offseason, a lot of people would expect either an extension or a trade of Chris Jones. And the way he's playing and what he means to this franchise and to the city and to the fans, I would lean towards an extension at this point. But, I mean, he really has been phenomenal all year. And this is 2 times in the last 3 weeks that he has made arguably one of the biggest plays of the game lined up at defensive end. And the one this week was the sack against McGlinchey. Actually, I think both of his sacks he was lined up at D end this week, and one of them was the strip whenever the game was already over. But the other one I'm talking about was the infamous roughing the passer call against the Raiders. But it's just, like you said, he's making massive plays in huge moments.
Yeah. And so we were talking about Kadarius Toney and why you make a move like that. And I think the answer is when you're paying your quarterback, because you have your quarterback, which is what Buffalo has to start doing now, they've got to seriously start making decisions around Josh Allen. We have to be money smart. Kansas City has to make smart money decisions because you've got your L'Jarius Sneeds, and your Willie Gays and your Nick Boltons and all of these guys that need to be paid. And, we don't have a bunch of receivers signed. You've got to find this inexpensive talent because if I was saying the most important players on the Kansas City roster, it's Mahomes, and then I have to stop and think before saying Travis Kelce, because Chris Jones is that good.
Mm-hmm. And I think after Jones, I think it's Snead.
And the reason I would maybe say Chris Jones is the second most important player on this team is because Travis Kelce might be the best tight end to ever play football, but the difference between Travis and a competent NFL tight end, how many good tight ends are there in the league? And how many true pass rushing defensive tackles are there?
And not only that,
Chris Jones is a unicorn.
Not only that is in that he is that good and almost a one of one. I've said for a long time that short of Aaron Donald, like watching Chris Jones play football, the things he does with his hands and his hand usage and how quick he is at that size, it shouldn't be possible. And if it wasn't for Aaron Donald, we would look at him in a completely different light. But he also is the complete engine of that defense. If there was no Chris Jones on that defensive line, it might be the worst in all of football. And here's another thing. There's such a thing as just having a knack for the moment. If you ever think about Dan Sorensen as the poster child for being, Dan Sorensen was never an above average overall NFL player. At best, he was an average NFL safety and had this amazing knack for making the biggest play in the biggest moment. And we loved him for it. For a lot of us did. For a little bit.
For a while. But have you ever seen a player with more of a knack to make the play at the right time than Chris Jones? And he always makes that key sack in the fourth quarter or that turnover, and that changes a game. And and it's not like he's just eating popcorn the rest of the time.
Right.
He's dominating, but then when you need the sack, that's when he comes up with it.
And that's the thing too, is we've already said that he's having a great year. He's got 5 sacks, a lot. I think he's like third or fourth in the entire league in pressures. He's got 32 pressures through 7 games. But all of the numbers and the analysis I've seen on Chris Jones this season is that he's playing the run better than he ever has, and he's giving a lot of that credit to Joe Cullen, the new defensive line coach. And a lot of other people have really talked about their relationship and how their personalities are so similar because they just are really loud, aggressive guys. And I saw a clip a few weeks ago on the sideline of Joe Cullen just like 2 inches from his face, just screaming. He's like, "That's how you rush, Chris," and it's awesome to see. But he's having a career year, truly.
So it's a lot of fun to do what we've been doing, but I feel like we've spent way too much time talking about positives in a game where there were some glaring negatives from the defense.
Mm-hmm.
And one, he pointed out a couple games back, and I didn't want to hear it. Nobody wanted to hear it, but other people are seeing it too, is that Nick Bolton has gotten to be soft at the point of attack sometimes. It takes a different kind of effort and intensity to get off of a block in the hole or to fight through the block, and it seems like Nick Bolton is too easily blocked right now at the point of attack for his position. I mean,
and I don't know necessarily. I think there is an aspect of it that is that he is not excellent at getting off of blocks. But I think the primary issue right now, and it's not, I love Nick Bolton as much as the next guy. And once he gets his hands on somebody, he's not losing that. Like, he's gonna make the tackle. Phenomenal tackler. And the Chiefs haven't had a guy like that at linebacker since Derek Johnson. But I think the main issue with that is where he's getting blocked, because it's often 5, 6, 7 yards upfield. If you're going to be getting engaged by a fullback or a pulling guard and not being able to disengage, it needs to be in the hole or 2 yards up the field.
Yeah, and so Bolton has just made this habit of making, behind, tackles for loss. Mm-hmm. He blows plays up. In the last few weeks, I'm not seeing that as much as I'm seeing him getting pushed back. I don't know what's going on, if something's changed, but it seems like there's been a little bit of a dip from Nick Bolton. And I thought Bolton and Gay were going to be an all-pro pair, and they didn't look like it against San Francisco, and they didn't look like it the week before, and when only Bolton was there. But
my only caveat to that is I do want to give them a little bit of time together again, because the run defense was excellent in the early season. Teams weren't trying it with as heavy personnel. Like, we saw the Raiders go 6 O-line and a fullback a lot, and the Chiefs didn't have an answer for that. But that was during that stretch where Willie Gay was not playing, and I think there's probably an element of that where Nick Bolton, not only being the leader of that group as a second-year player, but being the leader of the defense as a second-year player, feeling the responsibility of, with Willie Gay out, like, he has to be right. He can't be making mistakes out there whenever you've got a rookie next to you and then a guy that's coming in off the bench next to you, and I don't think he's got as much freedom in that scenario as he does with Willie Gay, who isn't coming off of a suspension and working back up to speed. So hopefully that can alleviate some of that problem.
Yep. And then from the entire secondary, what I've noticed lately is hustling to get your hands on a guy and then acting like the play ends when you get to him. There's been a lot, and I know it's the trend in the NFL to push the pile, and they're not blowing the whistle, and they're letting them keep pushing for more yards, and that's great. And we've been doing some of that too, but we are letting that happen way too much. And a lot of patty cake tackling in the secondary.
Yeah.
We've seen Sorensen not want to tackle. I think maybe the rookies need a little bit of...
You said Sorensen.
I always call Thornhill Sorensen on this show, and it's not because I don't know the difference between the two players whatsoever. They have the same sounds in their name, the O and the R and the N. Sorensen, Thornhill. It's like the same name almost, right?
Something like that.
Have you ever seen those two guys in the same room?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, they did play on the field together. So Sorensen didn't tackle anybody last week. That SOB, if Sorensen doesn't get a tackle, I think we should cut him last year.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not been tackling well.
And he actually led the team in tackles for this game. He had 13 tackles.
And everybody I think knows that there should be a caveat, like tackles should have a gradient to how far down the field they are. If you, like, I'm covering you, catch a 30-yard pass and I catch you for a 47-yard gain, that tackle is just as good as if it's a 1-yard gain.
Yeah, and that's the thing too with the Nick Bolton discourse, that people, whenever it was even suggested that he's not playing as well as he can be, Chiefs fans were super upset and all up in arms, and there were these stats getting thrown around that he's on pace for 170 tackles, which is phenomenal. But football analysis cannot be broken down to the number of tackles that are made. And don't get me wrong, like I said, it's a valuable thing to have a linebacker that is a sure tackler. But if you're making 170 tackles 8 yards down the field, that's not good.
And the fact is that the two of us feel like Bolton and Gay are going to be a great linebacker tandem, but it's like I said about Patrick Mahomes being my favorite player, and I can still say he's backpedaling before the pressure. He could have stepped up. He's going backward, and he's making the play harder early in his career. And I bet Andy Reid was saying that, like, hey, you did 8,000 good things, and this is what you got to do better. Mm-hmm. And he wants to hear it. Well, Nick Bolton has to be that player too. And you hope you're saying that Cullen is still that animated with an all-pro player like Chris Jones.
Yeah.
And so what you hope is that, and Bieniemy's that guy on the offense. Anything negative you want to say about Bieniemy, he's that guy that will come up to Pat Mahomes and say, you're doing this wrong.
Yeah.
And there has to be someone who comes up to Nick Bolton and says, hey, you're one of our best young players. We love how aggressively you tackle and you shoot through a gap. But here's a case where you've got to step it up.
Yeah.
And that I'm confident that is already happening. Mm-hmm. That's how they handle their business. They probably tell each other. They're watching film. They're telling each other, like, we were too soft in this.
Yeah.
And so it's not trying to trash a player. It's just our run defense was too soft. And part of that is personnel groupings. If we're, any team that runs when you're playing the pass and passes when you're playing the run, that's a winning formula.
Yeah.
So,
and I think there's another little aspect of that we're seeing a little bit more Leo Chenal as time goes on, especially whenever they're expecting a run. And I don't know how comfortable those two are together, Nick Bolton and Leo Chenal, because all three of the Chiefs linebackers have one thing in common. Willie Gay is a lot better in space than either of the other two, but all three of them as run defenders are at their best whenever they are not thinking and they're just going downhill, hit a guy and make the play. And I think the struggle there that we're seeing is whenever Bolton and Chenal are having to think, and they're not necessarily always on the same page. Yep. So you'd hope that gets ironed out. But the rest of the defense, I think, had a very strong day. I mean, you could have watched that game and not known Deebo Samuel played in it. And that's a guy who was first team All-Pro last year, had over 1,700 scrimmage yards, and I think it was like 17, 18 touchdowns. And the Chiefs held him to under 50 yards.
So, a crazy thing, we all get mad about the one-on-one coverages against star receivers. But since Spagnuolo has been the coordinator, I feel like we've been pretty exceptionally good at stopping passing attacks outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's what we're allowing because it's the one thing that we're leaving an opening by singling up guys on the outside like that, but we're not getting killed over the middle.
Right.
And the way this Kansas City team loses football games is when teams take 8-minute drives, then all it takes is one third down stop, a penalty, a holding penalty, one dropped pass, anything like that. Somebody misses one block, you're off the field, and they take another 7 or 8 minutes.
Yeah.
That's how Kansas City loses. We don't lose because our defense can't stop them most of the time, and it's 40-41.
Mm-hmm.
We lose more 20-17 games, honestly. And you say, how did we only score 17? Well, we only had 2 possessions in the second half. So I would almost rather blitz, create turnovers, shut down everything else, and if they beat us over the top, it's quick.
Yeah.
And then we're back on the field.
And that's one thing I like Steve Spagnuolo. There are times where, especially in a 2-minute drive right before the half, where he decides we're going to cover 0 blitz 4 plays in a row, and it almost never works. That's about my one beef with him, really. But
the turnover this week, we did the same thing.
Exactly.
In a situation where they should have had a touchdown, but it worked.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to say is the opposite to that is usually for all but those 2 minutes right before the half, Spagnuolo is very good at when he blitzes and at where he blitzes from. And I love how often whenever we are backed up in the red zone, the Chiefs send cover 0 and they just say, if you're going to beat us, you're going to do it right now. You are making a decision immediately and the ball is coming out. And this week we saw George Karlaftis and Juan Thornhill blitzing from the exact same spot down in the red zone. And it looked like it got Trent Williams thinking, and he didn't really block either of them. And Karlaftis was in Garoppolo's face almost immediately, and Jimmy did one of his classic Garoppoloings and just threw a total duck to nobody, and Joshua Williams, who is a day 3 rookie cornerback, made a goal line interception, and it was a huge moment in the game.
So when you've got a great quarterback on the other side who's very hard to sack and, extends drives, and I feel like I still like what I said a minute ago about score fast or not at all. Boy, I hate giving up long drives because it keeps our offense off the field. The one caveat, after I said that and you started talking about the 0 blitzes, I about had a seizure. Then I about broke the chair I'm sitting on because if it's 3rd and 27
in the AFC Championship game.
I thought that was in the regular season meeting with the Bengals, the 3rd and 27.
You're right.
If it's 3rd and 27 in the 4th quarter, I would put 2 people on Jamar Chase because there's only one way for them to convert 3rd and 27. It's to throw 28 yards to a one-on-one Jamar Chase.
It's the classic example of never do what the offense wants you to do. Like, the Bengals in that situation, they're like, please give us Jamar Chase one-on-one.
The Bengals had 2 ways to convert that. If we doubled Jamar Chase, they're running a double Statue of Liberty flea flicker because nothing else in the playbook, but you throw it up to they've actually got 2 guys who can, go up and take a ball from you.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to guard that route, but primarily Jamar Chase.
Yeah.
So in the most important spot of the game, put somebody over the top of the best receiver.
Right.
But you don't have to do it the whole game. You can play way the rest of the time.
It's pretty crazy. You look back at the Bills game, early on the Chiefs had a ton of success blitzing Josh Allen. And part of that was he was missing guys, part of that was that they were just tricking him and he wasn't ready for it. But then he burned them for 2 touchdowns on those cover 0 blitzes. One of them right before the half, like we were talking about, and then the other one, I believe it was middle of the third quarter. But the crazy thing is about that the Bills are the only team in the league, and we know how good Patrick Mahomes is against the blitz. We see all of the stats. But this season, the Bills are the only team in the league with a positive EPA per play against the blitz. And in that game, despite those 2 long touchdowns, the Chiefs held the Bills to a negative EPA per play when blitzing. So they gave up 2 touchdowns, but overall were very successful blitzing Josh Allen.
Yeah. So the last thing is that we're hoping that the best corner on the roster, well, maybe the second best corner on the roster, Snead's a fantastic corner.
And Snead's a DB more than he's a safety corner. He's everything.
We use him as a pass rusher.
Right.
Has he played any defensive tackle?
Which
Snead's pretty good, but our best outside cover guy should be Trent McDuffie, and we're gonna find out in 10 days, and that could be the difference maker we need if we had a true lockdown out there.
Yeah.
So if he can pester Jamar Chase on a 3rd and 27 jump ball, which I know he's not the tallest guy, but if he can make a play on the ball instead of just being in position. But lot of good things, and we forced out a little bit of negative. It didn't come natural to focus on the negative, but we did it because there is some in every team.
Right.
So you got anything else you want to add?
Yeah. So while we were on the topic of L'Jarius Sneed, I know he split the sack with Willie Gay in this game to bring him to, I think it's 3.5 on the season, which puts him, I could be just a little bit off on this, but I think he is 2 sacks short of the single season Chiefs record for a defensive back, and 2.5 sacks short of the career record for a Chiefs defensive back. And he's in year 3. So his effectiveness as a blitzer it's up there with any guy that's played for the team.
And he likes knocking the ball out when he gets there, which I don't have anything against that.
Right.
So, all right, hey, we appreciate you taking time to watch, and we'll see you on the next one.